worked with people with disabilities and their families for about 20 years now. It wasn't what I intended to do. My degree's in English literature, and my plan was to be an English teacher. But there you go, things change. And at first it felt like a bit of a failure, but actually I've come over the past 20 years to realise that what felt like a failure was actually the opportunity for me to hit that really sweet spot in my life, to know and to do exactly what I think I was born to do, and to have the opportunity to attempt to make a small difference in the life and the work that I have. I'm fascinated, because I love literature, I'm fascinated by stories. We have stories for everything. We have stories to help us celebrate. We have stories that tell us about creation. We have stories that warn us. We've got stories of sadness and joy and darkness. We tell ourselves stories all of the time. Stories are part of the mental furniture, if you like, of our life. And it's not just that we tell ourselves stories. These stories begin to form our ideas of who we are and who we are in relation to other people in the world. You think of the stereotypes that arise out of stories, the wicked witch, the beautiful princess. Think about how prevailing these are in the ways in which our culture think about things and situations. So I'm fascinated by stories from the point of view of stories revealing the values that we hold about people and who they are. A great teacher of mine, a man called Michael Kendrick, says that our values are simply the stories that we tell each other about who we are in relation to one another. Now, I'm not a philosopher. I'm not an expert in semantics. I'm sure there's a difference between a value and a belief. But for the purposes of the next 12 minutes or something, if you would allow me to hold that definition of a value, a story that we tell one another about who we are in relation to each other and the merit and the worth that we give to one another. Okay? I think we tell stories all of the time. If you're anything like me, this might sound familiar to you. You're in the supermarket queue. You're at the checkout. You're waiting to go through. And you're idly looking in the basket of the person in front. You've checked out everything they've got in their basket. And you've constructed a whole sort of scenario about who they are. You know, if I tell you about, standing behind someone, he's tall and he's quite good looking and he's got his tie kind of loosened off in a kind of rakish way. It's 6 o'clock. He's already been to the bottle shop. You can see the foil and the distinctive shape of the champagne bottle. He's got a basket that's full of steak and strawberries and asparagus and cream, and there's a bunch of flowers there. What's the story that you're telling yourself about who he is and what he's up to and what he's likely to be doing for the rest of that night? I think he might think he's onto a good thing somewhere. Okay? Picture the same story, the same supermarket. And you've been followed around that supermarket by 4 feral children who've been climbing on shelves. You get into the queue, the kids are in front of you, climbing all over the trolley of a woman that they call Mum. And in her trolley, she has pre-processed foods, she has chips and cordials, there's no fruit, there's no veg, there's nothing that looks like, nothing that you could make a meal from, lots of things to heat up. What's the story that you're telling yourself about those children? I'm thinking, no wonder those kids are like that. The only good thing is I have the sense to not say the words out loud. I realise that actually that story forms a really important judgment that I make about who that woman is and who the people are in her life, how she operates as a mother. And where does that story come from? That story comes from me having a Scottish mother who made practically everything that we ate except for the bread, who made us all sit down and eat together, who told us about the importance of learning to cook, feeding your family well, looking after them, working hard for them, giving them good food. That stuff is played for me over and over and over in my mind. I can't get rid of it, no matter how I try. I hear her voice. What are you making for Sunday dinner? Surely not that rubbish. I can't. She's part of a story that's in my head. Here's a chance for you to make up a story. Here's a picture. Tell me a story about that picture. You don't know who these people are. You've never met them before in your life, but you walk past them in the street. Who are they? Who are they in relation to each other? What's going on in the picture? Have a go.
Father and son.
Father and son? Tell me why you think they might be a father and son.
Hair colour. The taller man is leaning on the wheelchair. It looks as if he cares.
Okay, right. So it looks as if he cares, and there's some clues, there's some visual clues. Because you've seen grey-haired older men with dark-haired younger men, and you've thought that's what the relationship might be. You've maybe experienced it in your own life. You've got a story that you can sort of fill out some of the details of. Any other guesses at what the story might be? Where do they live? Where do they come from? Yeah?
They're both veterans.
We're both veterans, really? Yeah?
The one on the left is Afghanistan, the one on the right is Vietnam.
Right, okay, thank you.
And the one on the left is struggling to cope with what the one on the right already knows how to cope with.
Okay, thank you, that's a great story. And it's a story that's half right, actually. It's very interesting. Let me just tell you about this picture. The picture is it's a photograph of my husband, who's here, Richard, and his support worker, Paul. Paul, it happens to be the veteran, and indeed a veteran of Vietnam. Paul and Richard have worked together for 12 years. Richard has a condition called spinal muscular atrophy, which means that he has only a tiny bit of movement in one of his hands. And so Paul effectively provides Richard's hands and feet for him. You know? And lots of people, when I show this story in training, when I'm doing work with people with disabilities or people who work with folks with disabilities, people will tell me that this is a story about, you know, a carer and somebody that they support. And they're quite often telling me that they're going back home to the care home where Richard lives. What they have is a really small story. Because what their story doesn't take into account, and it's never happened in all of the times that I've shown this picture, no one has ever said that Richard might be a person who has his own home, runs his own business, has a wife, is a counsellor for the city of Melville, is a widely respected volunteer and advocate for people with disabilities in the area where we live. They have a really small story. Right? The story is this size, when in fact the story of Richard's life is enormous. And what they don't know about are the ways in which Richard supports Paul. Because Paul has his own struggles, Paul has his own tensions, and Richard is as much of a support to him as he is to Richard. But you probably wouldn't know that until you got to know them a bit better. We don't have lots of stories of people with disabilities living that kind of life in the world that we live in. Now, a small story would be okay, but what happens to our stories is that they quite often don't just stay in our head or in our hearts. They become our practice, they become the things that we do, they become the policy of our government, they become the decisions that we make around finance and opportunity. So we're in this really interesting, I'll just tell you a really personal story about Richard and I. We've been married now for 2.5 years, but been together for 6.5 years. And on all of the time that we've been together, we've probably managed to sleep together the entire night in the same bed on possibly 6 occasions. Now, I'm not talking about sex or anything, I'm just talking about sleeping together. I'm talking about that thing where you roll over and the last thing you say at night is, "Good night, darling, see you in the morning." And the first thing you do when you open your eyes is you smile and you see him there. "Hey, babe, how are you?" That kind of easy intimacy that many people would tell you in their marriage they prize more than the sex sometimes, more than lots of the other things that go with being married. Because we don't have a big story about disability, because we don't imagine lots of people with labels of disability experiencing the kind of life that Richard has, it's really difficult for us to sleep together. Richard needs a particular kind of bed with a particular kind of mattress. He has people who help him get up in the morning, and they need space so that they can operate safely because he uses a hoist, so a regular double bed doesn't work for us. We could buy a bed, but it's going to cost us something like $25,000. And it's also going to need a huge room so that the two parts of the bed can split apart and people can come in. You know, but nobody's thinking about how to do this because there just isn't the demand. There aren't enough people who are experiencing that kind of life to make it feel like it's worthwhile for people to start to think about how to do something differently. So the stories we tell have an impact on our lives. Okay. I'm never knowingly hindered by research, okay? But I read something the other day that told me that of the 60% of people with disabilities who are eligible to, who would be able to work in Australia, right? There are only 45% of them, of all of the people with disabilities who are able to work in Australia, only 60% of them have jobs. Sorry. You can tell why I'm never knowingly hindered by research, okay? Okay. that out of a whole range of supposedly developed countries, Australia comes last, due to the fact that more than 45% of the people with disabilities who live in Australia either live on or below the poverty line. Okay? Our stories influence how people live. Okay. So what can we do to change that? How can we start to tell a different story? The title of this talk is A World That Works for Everyone, and that the title is thanks to a friend of mine, a lovely woman called Beth Mount, who's done a huge amount of work in making a difference in the lives of people with disabilities. And Beth, I like the title because it's not yelling at you to change. It's an invitation to think gently about what we might do that might make a difference. How can we create a world that works for everyone? In this anywhere earth, in Anytown, Bunbury, how can we make a difference? How can we change the story? So, in the time that's remaining to me, I've got a few ideas for some different stories that we might tell one another. And these stories are about the values of inclusion, or at least they're about inclusion, and they're the stories that I think might be helpful for us in thinking differently about people. Now, I just have to not panic here and start to do random clicking, and otherwise all of these will come up at once. Can you read that? It says that everyone is born in, which is the quote that Rebecca made. I think this is a really important thing. It seems like such an obvious thing to say, everyone's born in. But actually contained within that, there's some huge truths about people. It means that people are also born entitled. You know, people are born entitled to the same kind of treatment that the majority of us experience. A label of disability or difference does not mean that your life needs to be less. You are born into a common humanity that is protected under law, okay, for you to achieve your human rights. Everyone's born in. People with disabilities are not some subsection of humanity. The next of the values of inclusion is the one that really scares me when I start talking about it. It says, all means all. And it's one of those great little slogans. It's like Obama, you know, yes, we can. All means all. When I start to unpack that, I think, what on earth am I saying when I say that? You know, there are people who work with us that actually I think, oh, I don't want to be in with you. If an inclusive society means that I've got to spend time putting up with you, I don't want to be there. You know, I don't want to be in with people who smoke. I don't want to be in with people who do horrible things to children. I don't want to be in with those people who've got bumper stickers on the back of their ute that say, this is Australia, we love it. If you don't like it, F off back to where you came from. I don't want to be in with those people. And yet inclusion is exactly about that, about finding a way for us to live together. Not about us all being one big happy family, but finding a way to work out that rub and to find ways to include the most difficult, the most troubling, the most frightening of us. We say too in the values of inclusion that everyone needs to be in. It is important that people can get to be where other citizens are, that you can get to the bank, that you can get into the polling booth to vote, that you can conduct your affairs in the council offices without it having to be done in front of everyone in some kind of large-scale way. So access, universal access, good access for disability is good not just for people with disabilities, but actually good for everyone. As I get older and my feet get a bit sore with arthritis and I'm generally a bit sort of, you know, less agile around things, I'm glad sometimes that there's a ramp, you know, or that a door opens automatically, that I don't need to put it all down and, you know, pick it all up again and hope that the door stays open. Good access is just good access. And if you're a mother with a toddler, you know, and somebody in a buggy, then you will really appreciate the fact that the step for the bus lowers and that you don't need to walk miles to get curb cuts to help you move around. But it's not enough just to be in. You've got to be with people. When we closed the institutions in Western Australia, you know, well done, good job. But what we've often created is a small series of ghettos, little lonely places at the ends of cul-de-sacs where people don't know their neighbours, where people don't connect with one another. You know, people are there, but they're not with other people. Inclusion is part of a huge network of relationships relationships, dependencies, supports. It's all there. Everyone needs not just to be in the town, but with people from the town, part of that community. Everyone's ready for that kind of life. You know, I hear parents say, oh, it's a bit scary, too much to think about. I was thinking about what Bryce was saying about families being anxious about their sons and daughters learning to ride on the road. And I think probably the way that you learn to cycle on the road is by cycling on the road. It's how you get better at it. How you learn to live is by living. No one said to me, Heather, you've got to wait till you balance your checkbook before you leave school. That's a prerequisite. Because, 54 years, I'd still be waiting to do that. They said, Heather, your life begins, get out, get on with it, make mistakes, find ways through it. Everyone's ready. That's a different kind of story. Everyone needs support. There is not a single person here who didn't come with some sort of support in their life to get here today. If you used a hairdryer, or you filled the dishwasher before you left, or you drove here by car, or you put the washing machine on before you went out, or somebody made you a cup of tea or went and got the shopping for you while you did something else, you were getting support. If you're a parent, it might feel that you support more than you are supported. But everyone needs support. Everyone gets support. Some people just need more support than others. Fall over, break your leg, you're going to need more support for more time. I used to say that I was an independent professional woman when I was working freelance. My mother and father made my life possible. My brother used to say it was like having a sweatshop of old age pensioners, because they all sort of were there collating training packs and all sorts of things for me. I couldn't do what I was doing without Rick. Okay? Everyone needs support. Some need more support than others. Everyone can communicate. My friend Dave Hinsberger talks about some people being in a linguistic minority of one. And I think Fiona touched on this morning when she was talking about some of the children that she visited. The kids who don't use words to speak, but are nevertheless ready and able and willing to participate in the conversation if we can just figure it out. But if we start with the story that says you can communicate, you'll find a way to communicate. Everyone can contribute. It is fabulous when the contribution that someone makes to your life is to light up with a smile whenever you come in the door. That's one of the major contributions that I get from being married. Is somebody glad to see me when I come in? But there are some people who take you right to the end of your patience, who challenge you on really fundamental levels about who they are and who you are and what they do. And is that not a contribution to your learning and to your life? Yeah? Is it not? What do you learn about yourself in that space? Yeah? Everyone can learn. We're very bad at what we teach people in the field of disability. We have what Noel Pearson called the soft bigotry of low expectations. The soft bigotry of low expectations. I think someone's flashing a light at me over there saying that I need to stop soon, so I will do that. The last of the values of inclusion say that together we're better. We don't think that a world where there's no disability or difference is a better world. We actually think that there's a huge richness from our diversity, that there's lots to learn. The great thing about our lives and our world being comprised of stories is the stories that we tell ourselves, we can write for ourselves. The values of inclusion are some suggestions about different stories, different ways that we could think about who we are in relation to one another. Cinderella got to go to the ball. Sleeping Beauty was wakened with a kiss. Things can change. The direst of circumstances, the most desperate, the most unhappy, the most unfortunate, the most seemingly impossible can change. We can change the story. What we need is a world that works for everyone. And until we start telling ourselves different stories around that, I'm afraid it's not going to work for anyone really, because everyone loses. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak about this today and for your patience. I've gone over my time. I'm probably in trouble, but thank you.